Hello everyone, I'm Mark Jarvis, visiting professor at Manchester Metropolitan University's Faculty of Accounting, Finance and Banking. And this is our second recorded webinar, looking briefly over the next 25 to 30 minutes at the economic events around the world. I say right now as it literally changes every day, but with that caveat in mind, let's delve into the events, looking firstly at the broader COVID-19 statistics, moving on to light at the end of the tunnel, let's say, in terms of when the lockdown will be over, and then a bit more detail on the impact of the economy around the world, finishing with some details for the UK. So back to the pandemic itself. Perhaps the most upsetting and surprising data for the UK this week was the inclusion of the deaths at care homes. This has taken the UK death rate to over 26,000 people who have died from coronavirus, making us the second worst hit country in Europe. I'd like to share with you this slide, which really looks at the world and all the different countries by different statistics. And I've sorted this one by the column on the right here, you can see circled with a red, which is deaths per 1 million population, a very sobering statistic, I know, but what we can see here is that excluding San Marino and Andorra, which are of course very small countries and skewing the data, you can see Belgium, then Spain, Italy, and then the UK. So we are number 4 around the world in deaths per 1 million population in the UK. So that's quite a heavy number. With the inclusion of the care home statistics, we have now surpassed France, and our deaths per million population is now worse than France. So quite some shocking statistics. On the right here, you can see our deaths in the UK from coronavirus per day. The graph was going down to the right, and that was giving the government quite a lot of confidence. The last 2 days, with the inclusion of the care home data, has of course pushed that back quite a bit. Although it is going down, it is in the right direction, but a bit slower perhaps than we would have liked to see. But despite this, countries are now beginning to ease lockdown rules. But I think it's important to look at what we've seen in Germany. And Germany has been running quite a tight lockdown, and as the infections began to ease, they released a little bit of the lockdown measures. Unfortunately, they've seen a pickup in the infections. So I think it's too early to say whether the lifting of the restrictions caused the increase. The country's overall number of COVID-19 cases grew by 1,018 on Monday and 1,144 on Tuesday. So something to watch again for our UK country, of course, to think about whether the easing of the lockdowns and how that will impact the new cases. However, there are some good news generally, is that we can see here the European countries, we do see some flattening. You can see Germany here in the dark orange, which has been flattening, and obviously that gave confidence to the government to ease those restrictions. We'll have to see what happens next, but Spain there still quite on a high trajectory. Moving back to perhaps the individual countries in Europe, just to give you some idea of what people are doing. So Italy will see a series of restrictions lifted on May the 4th, allowing the country's population of some 60 million to once again be able to exercise outdoors and move around their own regions. More restrictions will be lifted on May the 18th and then June the 1st, and schools, however, will remain closed until after the summer holidays, reopening in September. Spain, children are now allowed out, but not for long. For the first time in 6 weeks of complete lockdown, children were once again heard on the streets of Spain. So from the 2nd of May, citizens will be able to go out with others from the same household, and jogging, exercising will be allowed. France mentioned this on a previous webinar, but has already announced earlier this month the government will start to ease the lockdown measures on May the 11th. Schools and kindergartens are set to restart gradually. Restaurants, however, will remain closed until at least the end of May, I think, and large gatherings have been banned until the middle of the year. Austria, a large number of shops have reopened, and in mid-May we will see the reopening of restaurants, cafes and bars, with limited business hours and of course the social distancing in place, but a big step forward. Daycare centres and schools have been permanently open in Austria, and so very different to what we're seeing here in the UK. Sweden, again, a controversial COVID-19 strategy. Cafes, bars and restaurants have been open. However, of course, they need to leave a space of 1 or 2 meters between tables, etc. But there are no restrictions on movement, and shops and most of the schools are actually open. And finally, Switzerland. So starting this week, hair salons, beauty parlors, hardware stores and gardening shops have opened. So schools and other shops are planned to be open in the next couple of weeks. So a lot of ideas, a lot of diverse messaging really, which I think demonstrates that there's clearly a long way to go yet. So having set the scene, let's look at the economy around the world. We do continue to see sectors, certain sectors hit very hard, as we focused on before. We've seen the shock of negative oil prices, as we discussed last week, where producers are actually having to pay to get their oil away. This has impacted all the producers clearly, and BP has declared this week a $628 million loss in this quarter. Travel, another area which is impacted, especially cruise lines, airlines are among those severely impacted this week, as you probably saw. British Airways announced the redundancy of 12,000 people. Of course, this is an indicator of the expected slowness of the economy, and perhaps a change certainly in the short to medium-term travel plans. It's very difficult to tell how people's sentiment today will react in the future, but sharing this slide of something by McKinsey, which some of you may have seen, you can see at the bottom here, international travel, that 37% of the respondents said that they felt that they would reduce international travel, only 18% increasing. So I think that's a shock for the rest of the world and a lot of this industry. We're seeing Boeing cutting 10 to 15% of its staff and proposing to halve the production of one of its key aircraft, the Boeing 787, from 14 a month to 7 a month. And again, on previous webinars, we do see travel plans being hugely impacted as people, I think, cut back on face-to-face meetings. An interesting fact that 75% of the profits of airlines is generated from business and first-class air travel. So if corporates begin to cut back on face-to-face meetings, this will have a continued and deeper impact on the airlines. Looking at the banking world, also showing signs of strains, HSBC announcing first quarter profits down by half and bad debt provisions up 5 times. Although some news from Barclays in the UK, who have made £43 billion of coronavirus-related loans. Consumers have been migrating significantly to digital banking during the shutdown, so we may see that having an impact on the retail branches, and that was all already happening in the UK before this pandemic. Slowness is also reflected, of course, in the retail sector. where we've seen an unsurprising collapse in sales outside of the food item subsector. We are seeing people eating at home more, obviously, and despite the average household shopping 14 times in April, down from 17 times a year ago, the average spend has increased by 25%, again, as home cooking replaces eating out. While leisure and hospitality sector, another at-risk sector, accounted for most of the earliest redundancies and furloughs, we are now seeing this in other industries, including retail, manufacturing, non-essential healthcare, and professional services. So something to watch out there. Looking ahead, the loss of employment will likely continue to cascade across different sectors. Strained budgets are beginning to force local governments to cut public sector jobs, and a drop in charitable giving is hitting the non-profit sector. Universities are also anticipating rebalancing their budgets with this in mind. But with statistics like the US, which showed the first quarter GDP falling by 4.8%, clearly a recession is on the way. The question is how deep and how long. And I wanted to share a slide here which really looks at the different shapes of the economy and the recovery. This is a slide that I have taken from Ernst & Young. EY has just recently published this slide, and it's available on their website. It nicely identifies the V, U, and L-shaped recoveries that we have talked about before. The thick yellow line is the V shape, a collapse in growth, followed by a quick return, and then off we go. The dash and dot is the U shape, which is the same trajectory but a lot slower. And then the dotted is the L shape, which is a much longer shape recovery. Clearly, the best case scenario for us is a V-shaped recession. If this happens, the economy will rebound as quickly as it declined, minimizing long-lasting financial damage. In the early 90s, the US went through a V-shaped recession. It lasted only 8 months. The economy started growing again fairly quickly, and we were off. But the recession from the financial crisis in 2008-09 was a little bit longer, more U-shaped, and so we have to see where we expect this to come out. Some executives are hopeful about the prospects for a V-shaped recession. I think probably a third of companies believe the recovery will be a V-shaped recovery, with the economy rebounding by the third quarter. The U-shaped, this one here, the dotted and dashed line, a bit longer, and I think if COVID-19 lockdown takes a bit longer to get under control, this could be more of what we expect to see, and certainly probably over half of the companies at the moment believe that a U-shaped recession is likely. We have talked about a W-shaped recession, a double dip, but I'm not particularly partial to thinking that's going to happen. The L-shaped recession is, of course, our worst nightmare, and this is the one here identified with the Greece Eurozone. It's using showing how long the recovery takes. So that would be Japan, for example, had this. Japan went through an L-shaped recession in the 90s. There was a steep market crash, followed by a credit crunch, other economic problems, and the country saw more than 10 years of slow economic growth. So I think that's one thing we do need to be very worried about. Hoping for a V-shape, could be a U-shape, but we'll have to keep our eyes on that, because that will have significant impact on us. on us, the economy and the business. Certainly there is some glimmers of hope. A couple more slides here for you to have a look at. This is IMF data. The one on the left really sums it up, I think, hoping for a V-shaped recovery. The data on the right is the same data, just showed differently. But on the left, you can see we have China at the top in red, the world in light blue, the US in yellow, and the European area, or the Euro area, in dark blue. So a view from the IMF that it is a V-shaped recession, a V-shaped recovery, with 2021 here on the right showing some very strong pickups. So certainly that's something we all hope for, something we really want to focus on, and we'll have as these webinars continue, we will continue much more into detail on this as the lockdowns become more severe and we begin to see what is happening to the economy. Of course, statistics keep coming out all the time, and as I said at the beginning, it is quite a job keeping on top of the daily information. Couple more slides just to show the US here, and we really are seeing an unprecedented job crisis here. I've shown similar slides to this before, but you can see here that this is the historic from the 70s US seasonally adjusted jobless claims from the US Department of Labor. And again, this red spike, which was for the week ending April the 18th, reflects the Americans that have filed for unemployment, so 26.5 almost million. And the latest quarter data from the US again here, with a decline of 4.8% in Q1 2020, is very concerning. So some positive, some worrying. Personally, hoping the IMF's right and the V-shaped recovery kicks into place. But, we'll be watching that over the next few weeks and sharing it with you. A quick look at Asia. Obviously, Asia is very important to us from a powerhouse point of view. The extension of containment measures around the region, I think, endangers a steeper economic dip than we earlier thought. The governments in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines have extended ongoing movement restrictions as the pandemic shows really few signs of abating, and in some places like Singapore and Indonesia has become significantly worse. In Japan, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe may be mulling an extension to the state of emergency beyond the 6th of May next week. But we do have some questions about whether the Bank of Japan will step up its stimulus efforts. So that's something to watch. And all this really boils down to suggestions that we're likely to see a deeper economic slump in this region this quarter. China, excuse me, China's 6.8% year-on-year GDP fall in the first quarter provides a sense of what we should be expecting from the rest of the region. But hopefully the worst of the outbreak is over in China and Korea. Whilst that doesn't guarantee their economic situations will normalize, it might provide a glimpse of where things are heading. So turning to the UK, unfortunately this week we saw some shocking PMI figures, purchasing manufacturing index figures, which basically provides information about current and future business conditions. And it showed a sharp decline in the UK, which emphasizes the sheer scale of the economic hit from the COVID-19. Of course, the more important concern now is the recovery. And despite bold economic measures we've seen from the government and Bank of England, it suggests a slow process. Despite the PMI's data collapse, and this of course is an all-time low, we do expect to see some pickup. In normal times, the PMIs are used as an indicator of GDP, and again, whilst these numbers are shocking, they don't really tell us anything we didn't know. The much more relevant question now, of course, and as we've just discussed, is what the recovery might look like. As lockdowns are unwound over the next couple of months, we might see the PMIs begin to rebound as more firms begin to report higher output. But this is all a little bit wishful thinking at the moment until we get out of the lockdown and start seeing the economy picking up. We do see the government's response to the crisis has been bold, and certainly the flagship job retention scheme has been well utilised. Firms, despite that, I think, will slip through the safety net, and this means unemployment, unfortunately, will take time to come back to the levels seen before the virus. And if I may share with you one further slide. This is a forecast of the unemployment rate in the United Kingdom. Very difficult to say, but these are some of the thoughts. Again, this is looking at a V-shaped recovery where the pickup is quick, and but you can see here, even under quite an optimistic suggestion, that not until Q4 2020 do we get back to 5.5, and that's still significantly more than where we have been for some period of time. So I wanted to come back just for a second to the EY Item Club. This is something, again, you can find online, but they do quarterly forecasts, and they use government assumptions in their forecast, which makes it quite an interesting tool. They issued the spring forecast for 2020, and they're projecting, using these assumptions, that the economy in 2020 will have a contraction of 6.8% compared to the pre-COVID-19 projections of a 1.2% growth. It's hard to imagine that only back in winter we were doing projections, not including the impact of the pandemic. I think we'll see a significant impact in GDP this quarter, maybe 10 to 15%. But of course, other people are forecasting. The Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR, have outlined a scenario that suggests this quarter may be as deep as a 35% reduction in GDP, but not something personally I support. But the range of forecasts demonstrates exactly how uncertain the immediate outlook is. So difficult to think about the path forward, and very difficult to forecast. So I want to wrap up now and have a little bit more look at the UK. Perhaps some less scary statistics for a moment. Interesting to see how movement in the UK is evolving under lockdown. The graph on the left, and this is all provided by Google Location. It's all available on Google. You can download it for free. Showing how the movements has changed over the last 3 weeks. The red being the more recent data. And as you can see, workplaces have picked up, so people are beginning to go back to work. Parks are down, grocery and farmers down, retail, recreation stations about similar. On the right, I won't go into the stuff on the right. Again, it is freely available on Google, but you can see certain areas, retail, grocery, parks, workplace, residential, many other interesting KPIs to have a look at there, to think about how people's changes how people are changing in the current environment. And of course, one final slide, which is an interesting one for us to just look at, is there has to be some upside, right? And the upside, of course, we've seen in the UK the last couple of weeks with significant change in our blue skies, some of the bluest skies we've had for many, many years, as the nitrous oxide NO2 has reduced significantly. And this is the World Air Quality Index, and you can see how the big cities around the world have really reduced their pollution. So something positive, but in these difficult times, it's I think it is quite difficult to find something positive. So I hope that that's something with you. So that's it for this week. Please look out for next week's live webinar, where we'll have new guests talking about the financial and banking situation in the UK. Please check out for more information on MMU's Manchester Metropolitan University website, or email cpe@mmu.ac.uk for more information. So I'm Mark Jarvis, and thank you very much for listening.